concern. We're concerned about the loss of 5,000 public sector employees. Serious concern as well. So we've got some serious concerns in this budget. There's things that we fought for, and we're going to continue to use our power as we have throughout this minority government to fight for Canadians to make Ottawa.
Okay, and that is NDP leader Jagmeet Singh talking about some of the things that were in the budget and some of the things that he would have liked to see, but also there at the end, as you heard, saying that he'll continue to use his influence to try and get the government to do more things under the supply and confidence agreement. David, let's come back to you a little bit to talk about other things that I'll let you decide what you want to talk about now, frankly.
Look, there's a lot there. One of the things that we have to point out, because this is going to be, I think, something we're going to hear from the Conservatives when they speak to this, and that is what is happening with the state of the finances overall. So look, I mentioned that the deficit is going to stay broadly in line with what the government talked about. And we showed the numbers there. It's hovering around $40 billion in the years that we have clear financial spending for. It's lower in the out years, but we just don't know what they're going to do or the next government is going to do in those years. But a number to watch is public debt charges. Rosie, right now, we are spending, at the year just ended as a country, $47.2 billion on the interest. In the current year, in this budget that's being projected, it's $54.5 billion. That's more than the federal government transfers to the provinces for health care. It's over 10% of every dollar they take in. 10 cents of every dollar is going to service the debt. And by 2028, 2029, with no new spending beyond what is there, and that includes a whole bunch of things we want to do in defense, for example, to get closer to that NATO 2% target, the government of Canada is going to be spending $64 billion a year in interest on the debt. You know, before the pandemic, it was like $30 billion. So a lot of that is the result of what has happened because of the debt they took on during the pandemic to avoid downloading it all to the provinces. But some of it is just a natural increase of the expansion of the size of the state. Program expenses right now are $500 billion. We're just below $500 billion at $480 billion for the year ahead, going up to $496 billion. So the size of government has grown, the size of the debt has grown, the size of the debt charges have grown, while they're rolling out pharmacare, child care, dental care, and an ambitious housing plan.
If you want to watch the full speech by Chrystia Freeland inside the House of Commons, you can do that on our website, cbc.ca. Our politics site particularly will have it easily for you. We'll bring up a bit of her as we continue to talk about what's in the budget. And if you have any questions about what's in the budget, you can go to send us an email, ask@cbc.ca. We'll do our best to answer them today and in the days ahead. We want to know what you think about what you're hearing so far. With that, let's bring in Jimmy John. He is the Vice President, Chief Economist, and Strategist for the Desjardins Group, and he was inside the lockup all day as well. Jimmy John, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So I want you to give me a sense of where you see the economy going, given what was presented today.
Well, what you see in today's announcement hinges a lot on revenue assumptions that rely on strong GDP growth. So you see how the stronger than expected GDP growth brings in that uplift in revenues in 23-24, $9 billion. It's expected to be $36 billion more in revenues over the horizon. However, having said that, it seems that the government assumes that the soft landing is a foregone conclusion. I wouldn't be so sure because we have an unemployment rate that just jumped to 6.1%. The other thing as well is that we rely heavily on tax collections that we don't know for sure how much we'll be able to collect. At least historically, there tended to be disappointment on that front. So there's still a lot of hope in that budget, I would say. The other thing being that the growth assumptions don't factor in the non-permanent resident emissions cutbacks that were announced. We know that immigration is the reason why Canada avoided a recession last year. There's that to consider as well.
One of the things that we've been talking about here with David is the increase on the taxes on capital gains. And of course, the fear there for anyone when that gets suggested is that people just start pulling investment or real estate out of the country. How comfortable are you with what seems to be an ambitious increase to the tax?
Very ambitious indeed. We're talking 19 billion, so it's no insignificant amount. And as you mentioned, we're targeting the taxpayers that are the most mobile in terms of their wealth, in terms of their incomes, wealthy individuals, highly sophisticated investors that, an accountant is just a phone call away, and they optimizing their taxes is what they do. So this is why those kinds of revenue-raising measures have tended to disappoint in the past. Let's see if they're better at targeting tax evasion, tax avoidance, or optimization. But it's still, we have to, it's still a leap of faith, I would say. Sure. And in the meantime, it does send as well a negative signal for the, high income, very talented individuals that Canada needs to pursue innovation, the innovation agenda, productivity, R&D, and those kind of things.
Yeah, that's a good point. And just so people understand, capital gains tax are taxes applied when you sell stocks, bonds, real estate, those kinds of things. And it's usually because you've got a lot invested in those different things. Jimmy John, you had previously, before the budget, worried, I think, a little bit about how increased spending contributed to inflation. We saw inflation tick up just a little bit today. What are your concerns now after seeing how big the spend is?
Well, I think I'm less worried about that now than I was maybe 2 years ago. The reason being that, at least according to the Bank of Canada, we're in a state of excess capacity in the economy. So 2 years ago, we were in excess demand. So any added government spending, and especially checks to households, would get spent and fuel inflation quite directly. Now, it's a bit of a different story, but at the end of the day, a dollar is a dollar, and even if you're looking at building more housing in order to reduce shelter inflation down the road, in the meantime, you still need more workers, still need more materials, and you might be bumping against some constraints. But it's more a question as to whether we have to think about inflation being at 2% or 3%. It's not a question of whether we're going back to 8%.
Last question, Jimmy John. Is there something in the budget here that you find will make a big difference when it comes to the issue of productivity, which I know is something economists like to talk about and are concerned about right now? Is there anything here that would make a difference on that front?
Well, that's the disappointment on my end. We haven't heard, in the lead up to the budget, we haven't heard any measure that really provided much enthusiasm as it comes to productivity, as it comes to moving the needle. Yes, you have the incentive tax credits in electric vehicles. Those had been announced already. At least we get a little bit more clarity on those. But much more needs to be done on investment and productivity. And I'm just concerned that the capital gains announcement will be taken as a negative signal as to what the government wants to happen in Canada by way of productivity and investment. So I think it was light on that front. And but this is the foundation for pretty much everything else that this budget relies on.
Jimmy John, always wonderful to have your analysis and your smarts. Thank you so much for making the time.
Pleasure, thank you.
Okay. As we were talking, Jagmeet Singh has come out to talk about what he did not get in the budget. Obviously, his party was looking for a windfall tax, a way to get excess profits from corporations. Was also looking for action on the disability tax credit, which I'll get David to mention in just a moment. He was asked whether he would support the budget, and he said that it was not the time to talk about that right now. However, they are in a supply and confidence agreement with the Liberals and have supported them in the past. So I'm not sure what he's suggesting there, David. I mean, he can pull out of the agreement anytime he wants, I suppose. But
yeah.
There is sort of a tacit, we'll tell you this if you tell us that, and so we expect him to do it.
In that agreement to support the government in any confidence votes and the budget.
What he's suggesting he'll do, but that is the agreement. That on the disability benefit, you want to just go over what is not there and what will be released?
Something Jagmeet Singh mentioned, and something we've been getting questions about on budget day and fall economic statements for years going back, that the government's promised to do something on this. The level of supports for people with disabilities is seen as too low in the country. And they did pass legislation promising to create a Canada disability benefit. The details are in this budget. You're probably going to be disappointed if you listen to what the experts said was needed for this. So Budget 2024 proposes funding of $6.1 billion over 6 years, starting this year, but payments would not start until July of 2025. The maximum amount an individual could get under this is $200 a month. So it's important to note that when you break this down on an annual basis, it's about $1 billion a year. I spoke to Neil Hetherington from the Daily Benefit Bank, which is a massive operation in Toronto that serves a lot of people and is part of a coalition of people who have been advocating for an increase in the disability benefit. They estimate, Rosie, that to get people up to basically a living standard, the federal government needed to put $10 to $12 billion every year into this program. It's $1 billion, rising to about 1.4. So in terms of ambition and range, it's about 10 cents on the dollar for what was wanted. There's some rationale for that in here, that essentially this builds on a bunch of existing benefits that are there. There are concerns at the federal level. I know from speaking with people, Rosemary, is that if the federal government came in a big way, provinces might pull back and people who get the benefit might not actually be any better off. But it also, I think, ties back to the desire of this government to stay within those fiscal targets they set for the deficit of $40 billion, no more than 1% of GDP. In out years, a declining debt to GDP ratio over time. $10 to $12 billion for yet another program expansion that is broadly provincial jurisdiction. Didn't fit into the plan, so there is a program there, but it falls well short of what advocates were looking for.
Well, and that is actually one of the issues that I get emailed about a lot as well. So obviously, I know there was a lot of anticipation around what would be there, and we'll let people judge for themselves, but certainly not, I think, what everyone was asking for. If you do have a question, though, for us, you can email us, ask@cbc.ca. If we don't answer it here right now in the next 30 minutes, we'll certainly try and answer it over the next number of days. Let's listen to Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland inside the House right now, talking more about what she's delivered today.
More affordable to go to college and university by renewing the increase in upfront Canada student grants and interest-free loans, increasing the amount of financial aid students get for housing, and making it easier for mature students to go back to school affordably. And all of this is on top of our campaign promise to eliminate interest on Canada student loans, which we delivered on a year ago.
Our new Canadian Entrepreneurs Incentive will ensure entrepreneurs get to keep a bigger share of the profits from the risks they take and the hard work they do, and have more money to reinvest into their next venture. A prosperous future and abundant, good-paying jobs depend on Canada's innovators, entrepreneurs, and researchers. And this is why we are supporting them.
Mr. Speaker, there are those who claim that the only good thing government can do when it comes to economic growth is to get out of the way.
That's why you sit there, guys. That's why they sit there.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce those people who just cheered, to the talented tradespeople and the brilliant engineers who last Thursday made the final weld. It's known as the Golden Weld on a great national project, the Trans Mountain Pipeline.
Yeah.
Speaker, it took an activist, determined Liberal government to get it built. And last week, the Bank of Canada estimated that this project alone will add quarter of a percentage point to Canada's GDP.
Bravo, bravo.
Mr. Speaker, as we invest with purpose for the benefit of our younger generations and those who love them, we continue to stick to a responsible fiscal plan. As part of that plan, in the fall, we set 3 very specific fiscal guideposts. Maintaining the 2023-24 deficit at or below $40.1 billion. Lowering the debt to GDP ratio in 2024-25 relative to the 2023 fall economic statement and keeping it on a declining track thereafter, and maintaining a declining deficit to GDP ratio in 2024-25, and keeping deficits below 1% of GDP in 2026-27 and future years. Mr. Speaker, in this budget,
Okay, that's a little bit more of Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland inside the House of Commons, getting a lot of laughs from Conservative benches when she mentioned that the best way for governments to create economic growth is to get out of the way, which is something Conservatives deeply believe and don't think the Liberals are doing. So lots of laughs there from the bench. If you want to watch more of that speech as it unfolds, cbc.ca is the place to do that. We're standing by, obviously, to hear from Pierre Poilievre, who will respond inside the House of Commons. We'll bring that to you live. But first, let's go to someone who, like you, has been listening in, Bryn Sinclair Waters. She's a mom renting in Toronto, and like a lot of Canadians, hoping to be able to buy her first home, and has been listening probably not only today, Bryn, but through the past couple of weeks to see if there are things there that could help you and your family. Tell me what your situation is now. You're renting now in Toronto, which from what I understand is not a great place to be renting, but tell me a little bit about what's going on for you.
That's right. That's absolutely right. So I have an 11-month-old baby, and a huge priority for my partner and I and our family is to have an affordable, secure place to live. And right now as renters, we don't feel secure. We worry. The lack of rent control means rents just keep going up and up and up. And we worry that if our landlord sells, we may have to move. This happened to us 2 years ago. We had been in our place for 7 years. Then we had to move when the house was being sold. We were able to find a place in the same neighborhood, but our rent almost doubled. And now if we look at the same units that we're living in now, in just 2 years, rents are already up 20 to 30% for the same unit that we're living in. So for us, it's great to hear the government talk so much about tenant protections in the last couple of weeks, but I think I've been renting now, I'm in my 30s, for like around 15 years, and things just keep getting worse. So we really need to see some bold action now. So that's what I'm looking for in this budget, is some action on investments in public housing, and doing something about the lack of rent control in our communities as well.
What about buying a house? Because there's lots of measures that have been announced over the past little while for that too. Is there anything there that you could see that would make it maybe more possible for you?
I think, so first of all, I wanted to say that right now, for us, without rent controls in place, without access to public housing, there's just too little of it. Buying and home ownership really does feel like the only path to housing security. But it shouldn't be the only path. Like, I think in some ways my partner and I would be so happy to be renters if we felt secure in renting, if it was affordable to rent in this city. But yes, there are measures targeted at first-time home buyers, which we do, because of the context, spend a lot of time thinking about what it would take to buy. It's discouraging because to this point we can't afford it. And I think when I see these measures, unfortunately, it seems to me that most of it is setting me up to extend myself further to buy my first home. And I don't see that as a path to housing security either. And so I think it really does come back to, like, what I'd really want to see is this government invest money in public housing, because I also see a lot of money going to developers too, in the way that we're incentivizing housing to get built. So that's the situation that we're in right now. We actually have a lot of housing being built, which is great, but I don't think it's necessarily going to end up being affordable, and a lot of it might be investor owned, which is tricky because for someone like me, housing is not an investment, right? And that's for most people. It's not an investment, it's a place to live.
Yeah, I think just thinking through the things that we've heard over the past number of weeks, the public lands thing might be an option because then you're leasing lands to developers, but there will be conditions around what you can build there. So you can see how maybe that falls into the kind of thing that you're looking for. But I did want to touch on one more thing with you before I let you go, and that's that you don't have a $10 a day spot for your kid either, for your 11-month-old.
And that's a key issue. And just to go back on the public lands piece, and I think the federal government does have a role in leadership, like you pointed out, right? It's like in the past, in the 70s, they actually put pressure on the provinces to bring in rent regulation. It would be great if there was funding and land use that they would say, like, if we're gonna use public lands, then there's got to be affordable units on those lands. And childcare, huge issue. Like, we're on 14 wait lists right now, and we don't have a space yet. I will say though, the fee reductions we've seen because of the investments that the federal government's making in childcare is massive in terms of affordability. But now what we need is spaces. We need to see that collaboration with the federal government to make sure that there's spaces in my community so that we don't have to be stressed right down to the wire and calling, constantly checking in just to get that spot. And to me, I think that means a lot of investments also in like the workers who are doing that work too, so that they can see a good job, because those are my neighbors too, right? It's like people who can't afford to live are also the people who are taking care of my kids and need a good wage to be able to stay in that profession.
Yeah.
So.
And some of that too was announced, but we'll see. It takes some time to get all these things in place, and you know, you need that space now rather than a year from now. So, Bryn Sinclair Waters, thank you. You're the perfect person to talk to. Lots of smart thoughts there. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rosie. It's great to be here.
Nice to meet you. Appreciate it very much. A couple of indications of what is important in the budget is if you just look at some of the words that are featured in the budget. Certainly, we've been hearing a lot about fairness from the government over the past couple of weeks. Well, that was mentioned a whole lot, as was affordability, housing, renters, Indigenous issues, younger people, Gen Z, millennials, all the words that you would expect in a budget that is very targeted to a certain part of the Canadian population, people trying to get affordable housing, buy homes, get rentals, and people who feel the squeeze perhaps more than others. The other reason that cohort has been targeted by the government is because they believe that is a group of voters that they can get back. And that is, of course, part of what this document is also about. I'm going to go to David and then in a moment bring you to Yves-François Blanchet, the leader of the Bloc Québécois. David.
Well, Bryn spoke on some of the issues that exist in what the government has announced over the past number of years. On childcare, for example, it's the aspiration is one thing, the execution is another, and so much of it depends on work done at the provincial level. And it's a similar thing with housing, right? So much of that depends on provincial governments and municipal governments approving things, and also the labor supply is going to be a considerable constraint on the construction. But we have some more details just on how the big housing strategy announced on Friday is going to roll out. And in particular, I just want to highlight what they've announced in terms of using government-owned lands. Their plan is to unlock up to 50% of government office buildings over 10 years to turn it into housing.
Yeah, I didn't realize that it would include offices, not just a piece of land. It's a building that could be there already.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the government buildings here in the downtown. Forbes was here not that long ago with the mayor of Ottawa saying it's time for people to come back to work to help with downtown work. Remote work is more of a reality for office jobs. You have surplus capacity, convert those into apartments. But also, if you've ever dreamed of living above a Canada Post, well, this government has a plan for you. You have the Post Office, you have the Department of National Defence. They own property across Canada, a lot of which is underused. And they aren't just putting this out there as an idea. There are specific properties in this budget that they say could be turned into something. So in terms of national defense, the Amherst Armory in Amherst, Nova Scotia, the National Defense Medical Center here in Ottawa, these are being looked at as possible housing developments. You know, if you live near the Hardin Street Canada Post and Fort McMurray, Alberta, that has been listed for sale. So there are properties here because the question has been, you have the ideas, you have the plan, how are you going to do it quickly enough that people can see progress? They've identified some inventory. They've mandated their departments to look at the land they own, the property they own, identify things that would be suitable for housing, and maybe be prepared to put it onto the market through some sort of arrangement, either through the lease that has been talked about or a flat-out sale, and have that converted into housing, some of which would have a component of affordability as a requirement getting in there.
But that could be done a lot faster than having to build a bunch of new things as well.
Yeah. You know, conversions are tricky, and you know, and one of the big things too about this, Rosie, is like I know we've talked a lot about the federal government and the pressure they have on housing. Rent control is provincial. So there is
yes,
a
we'll
role
hear
for
from
all
Brian.
of the premiers to play on that particular issue, not just the federal government.
Okay, David, thank you for that. Let's go now to the leader of the Bloc Québécois, François Blanchet, who's giving his reaction to what he has heard today.
He needs to speak with the Prime Minister to see if he can get more concessions perhaps on tax and corporations. Do you have any concerns about the NDP not supporting the government, that the government could fall?
I have no such concern. At the end of every episode of a series on Netflix, they say in the next part of this show, this is what will happen. We already know what will happen. Mr. Singh will come here and find an explanation for his keeping supporting the Liberals. Je n'ai aucun doute sur le fait
I
que
have
le
no
NPD
doubt about
va
the fact that the
supporter
NDP
le
will
budget des
support
libéraux.
the
Je n'ai
Liberal
pas mis
budget.
le Bloc québécois en alerte électorale. On
I
n'a pas peinturé
don't
mon nom
think
sur un autobus
we're painting
parce
my
que,
name on a bus just yet
on
when it
sait
comes
déjà
to
que le NPD
an
va
election.
supporter le budget.
But
C'est
we
comme
do
à la
know
fin
that the
d'une
NDP
série,
will
on regarde,
support
on se dit dans
the
un
budget.
épisode,
It's like
voici ce qui va se
at the
passer
end of a
dans
series,
chaque
they say this is what to expect in the next episode. So Mr. Singh will come here and provide a complex explanation as to why he will be supporting the Liberal government.
Think of the cost of our debt right now. It will be more than what our debt, Canada's debt. It's going to be more than our health transfers.
That is correct. The more you have to pay for the debt, the more you pay the debt, and the more you have to pay for the debt. And it's a cercle vicieux, which I don't know how to translate. So something has to be done, be more careful. The idea is not to spend money, but there are some programs, some measures which are necessary. But the problem is that every measure the government has put forward is an intrusion in the jurisdictions of Quebec and provinces. They should have spent less, they should have spent better, they should have stopped entirely any form of financial support to oil and gas industry, which does not need it, and we would have a much better budget. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, that is the Bloc Québécois leader, François Blanchet, talking about some of his concerns. Also saying that largely he, I believe, will not support the budget. He has some concerns around jurisdictional overreach for one, particularly around the housing issues, but I think those things will be discussed with the government of Quebec, so perhaps that will change. He also pointed out, rightly, as David was pointing out to me during one of the moments, that the NDP's pattern on budgets has been to not say whether they support the budget or not and try to squeeze the cloth dry. Would that be a fair, just get wring a little more out of the government?
Yeah, I think that, if I'm remembering correctly, Rosie, they did this with dental care. Remember, they wanted to see movement on dental, they wanted to see movement on pharmacare, they got a commitment on a legislative framework by pharmacare, and even though the supply and confidence agreement says that they will support them on confidence motions, you only have so many inflection points where you can manipulate the dominant partner in this agreement, and the budget, fall economic statement, key pieces of legislation, these are the moments. So the NDP, while it has this leverage, is going to use it. But it's interesting with Mr. Singh, we do see him taking credit for all the good things that the government does as an NDP idea, while then lamenting all the terrible things that the government he continues to keep in power does as well. Right?
Yeah, difficult position to be sure. So we're not going to read too much in, I think, to the NDP's position right now. Things will play out over the days ahead. Let's go back inside the House of Commons where Chrystia Freeland is wrapping up her speech, and then we will hear from the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada.
We will build more homes. We will make life cost less. We will grow our economy in a way that works for everyone. Together, we will unlock the door to the middle class for more Canadians and renew the promise of our great country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires de l'honorable chef de l'opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. This is the 9th deficitary budget since the Prime Minister promised that the books would balance themselves, and everything he's spending on has gotten worse. He promised that the deficits would make housing affordable, but it ended up doubling the cost of rent and mortgage payments and down payments to buy a house. He said that the cost of food would be more affordable, and now it costs 30% more, and 1 in 4 children aren't able to get nutritious meals. After 9 deficits, Mr. Speaker, the government is rich and the people are poor. And today, they're doing the same thing over again with $40 billion worth of inflationary deficit. That means $2,400 for each family in inflation and spending and increase to the national debt. And that's why the Conservatives have a common sense plan to put an end to this pyro Prime Minister who's adding fuel to the flames.
This is the 9th deficit. The 9th deficit after the Prime Minister promised the budget would balance itself. And what did he do with the money? Everything he spent on has become more expensive. He's doubled the rent, doubled mortgage payments, doubled the needed down payment for a home, forced 35 homeless encampments in Halifax alone. 1 in 4 kids cannot afford food. And now he's adding $40 billion of new debt and new spending. That's $2,400 of new inflation. That is why Conservatives will vote against this wasteful inflationary budget that is like a pyromaniac spraying gas on the inflationary fire that he lit. It is getting too hot and too expensive for Canadians, and that's why we need a carbon tax election to replace him with a common sense Conservative government.
Okay, and that is the response from the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre. No surprise there. He's not going to support this budget, saying that it's like a pyromaniac putting gas on the fire of inflation that he lit. Also saying that we need an election on the carbon tax. Of course, the carbon tax barely contributes to inflation at all. Let's bring in the At Issue panel here for their first take. Chantal Hébert in Montreal, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj, they're in the lockup in Ottawa. And before we say anything, you'll all be back later tonight on The National, but this is just to get sort of your first reaction. Andrew, why don't I start with you? Seems to focus a lot on, yes, big spending, also trying to find ways to create more revenue. What do you think the message is from this budget?
Well, I mean, for all the air of political desperation that surrounds it, with them where they are in the polls, it's a strangely underwhelming document. I mean, there's the usual, slew of new spending, another $11 billion a year just from the fall economic statement, which kind of makes you wonder why they issue those forecasts at all if they're so easily overtaken. But on the 3 big crises that are facing this country, I would say, one being the growth crisis, the second being the housing crisis, and the third being the international security crisis, they just really seem to have come up short in all of them, particularly in the growth crisis. You would never know that we had such a serious problem with productivity and growth from this document. There's no measures in here to really stimulate investment in general and to stimulate competition, which will force businesses to use that investment more wisely. There's just the usual subsidies and tax credits and gimmicks for the particular favored sectors of the government, artificial intelligence or clean technologies, et cetera. That is not going to move a $3 trillion economy in the way that it needs to be moved. The housing measures, some of them certainly sound very intriguing, those that haven't been already leaked in advance of the document. But I don't think anybody thinks that this is going to be enough to solve the crisis. And on defense, when you look at how serious the international security crisis is right now, when you've got this incipient alliance of these autocracies pretty much going to war against democracies, the amount of the increase in defense spending, so much of it in out years, not in immediate terms, again, this seems to come up short. When you've got a government that has hundreds of different priorities, I think this is what you run up against, is when you really need to focus your resources and your attention on a few big items, you're not able or not willing to do it.
Okay, I'll go to Althea because she's standing there right beside you, which is fun to see the two of you standing side by side. Althea, what's your take so far on what you've looked at today?
I was going to say, Andrew, what about the debt? Wasn't that one of your bullet points?
They managed to stay within their deficit and debt targets just by increasing taxes, so good for them.
Yeah, we know Andrew loves to talk debt. Go, Althea.
Well, I mean, Andrew calls it desperate. It's certainly an electoral budget, and it's very clear that they want Jagmeet Singh to support this budget. I mean, frankly, it could have been written by the NDP. I don't think it would have changed much than what's actually in this budget, although maybe there would have been more generous disability benefit payments because it's only $2,400 a year. Maybe there would have been a little less in terms of the credits to the oil and gas industry to help them move towards a greener transition. But this is I don't see how Jagmeet Singh could be really unhappy with this budget. And for Liberals who thought that Justin Trudeau's government had spent too much and was way too left-wing, this clearly, you know, the lines are drawn for the next election campaign, and this is a government that's going to be going after the NDP lunch. Clearly, it thinks that is the way to survive, or the way it thinks it can possibly win government again. And this is a field day, I think, for Conservatives because it is so drastically to the left. There are a lot of proposals in this budget that will only come into effect next year. So, like the disability benefit, for example, would only be a payment in July. There's some goodies that some people may not be expecting, like small businesses, for example, will get a whole bunch of money back from the carbon price that they may not have been anticipating, but the government has been sitting on this money since 2019. And then there are programs that they want to create that they haven't created yet, that they haven't even thought about the implementation. We hear the word propose and to launch and intention to introduce almost 300 times in this budget. So that's a lot of new program spending coming online. And the big challenge, frankly, will be for the government to implement any of this stuff, because that has been a huge challenge so far. If they want these programs to be, sold to the public as like, oh no, the big bad Conservatives will take this away, well, first they have to be implemented, and I don't know how they're going to do all that.
Okay, Chantal, you're in Montreal watching it from there. What is your take at this point?
My first take is I'm happy I didn't spend an entire day in a lockup for this. And my sympathy goes to my colleagues for having done so. I agree that it's about winning an election more than about setting a course or a different course. It's half a platform and at best half a federal budget. And on that score, they're going to be running against the clock to show Canadians, to show voters actual results on many of those fronts, because it's one thing to say it and it's another thing to implement it. Just think that they just recently finally struck agreements on healthcare financing with every province, or with most provinces, and this is a development stemming from a decision that goes back more than a year. So imagine some of the spending in there. There are choices though. The government could have chosen to come in with a smaller deficit. It had more tax revenues than expected. It chose to spend all of the extra money on new programs, and that does mean that they will be campaigning on the left and not trying to win back blue Liberals, fiscally conservative Liberals in the next election. I still think the opposition, the Conservatives, would have had a better field day if that deficit number had come in way higher than was forecast last fall. Remember, in the Quebec forecast versus the Quebec budget, the projections from last fall turned out to be way off compared to the final number, and that did go a long way to kill the post-budget boost that the government might have been hoping for. All in all, and like my colleagues and like Mr. Blanchet of the Bloc Québécois, I am not packing my bags for a spring election because the NDP would pull out of supporting the Liberals on this budget.
Okay, that's good. That's good information for me too. Andrew, talk to me about the politics more of it here, whether you think that this is, what it indicates about who the Liberals are trying to win back here.
Well, if you look at the polls, they're trailing now in every demographic and virtually every region. So it's a hard sell for them, but the ones that they're most likely to get are going to be young people. At least that's their calculation. Those are the most recent converts to the other party's causes. So clearly there's a pretty heavy focus on that. I agree that they're not going to win back fiscally conservative liberals. I think that's over and done with. Their only chance, it's not a policy choice I favor, but certainly politically, their only chance is to try to round up the NDP vote again, once again saying you must and the scary conservatives, but also saying, look at all the things we're doing that are basically what an NDP government would do. So rounding up the left is absolutely the only option. The center is gone.
30 seconds, and then our last word from Chantal.
Yeah, millennials, Generation Z are definitely the people that they're targeting with all this money, with all this effort. I also think that they want to actually engage the provinces in a fight. There's too much in this budget that is clearly provincial jurisdiction. Even things that they can't really do anything about, like a tenant's bill of right. What is the federal government going to do to support your rights as a tenant? But it's about putting something in the door, saying that you've listened and that you care. But also, I think that they are eager to engage on many different fronts in this budget. And then I will say, I think the only way possibly to bring blue liberals back into the fold would be to campaign against the tone of Mr. Poilievre's government and kind of the divisive, polarizing politics that they so have tried to whip up anger against. There may be more to mine in that direction, but this budget is not going to help them bring those people at all.
Last word to you, Chantal.
I don't think they've given up on blue liberals at all, or even red Tories. And I think they are counting on Pierre Poilievre to drive them holding their nose. The blue liberals and red Tories will be holding their noses whichever way they go. But it's still incumbent on Pierre Poilievre to demonstrate to these voters that he has a more serious plan than the Liberals. That's very much work in progress. Certainly, a campaign on the carbon tax is not going to come across as much of a solution to all the issues that Andrew raised early on in the panel.
Okay, thank you all very much for your first take. I'll see you all later tonight on The National. Chantal, Althea, and Andrew, thanks guys. David's been monitoring some of your questions coming into the Ask at CBC email. David?
I've also just thrown my phone on the floor.
that's
If you heard that noise, that was me dropping my phone here on the floor of the West Block. Look, we've had a couple of questions about a few things. Broadly summarized, there was a lot of emails from seniors wondering why pension benefits in this country, OAS, GIC, Canada Pension Plan, are not increasing, why they're so low. And it's not really addressed in this. I mean, this was one of the first things that this government did way back in 2015, and it rolled back the increase in the retirement age from 67 to 65. This is the sense of the plan, and this is how much the country spends on elderly benefits. By the end of what is being projected here, the government is going to have revenues, they say, in 28-29 of $546 billion. We spend $544 billion on programs. $99.9 billion alone for the elderly benefits.
Because of the aging population.
It's because of the aging population, because of the rate that they are at. But you're getting into the 20% range of 20 cents of every dollar just going straight to elderly benefits. So that's one of the challenges there, in that increasing that to a point that it makes a difference to people. I'm not suggesting people don't need more money. It just ripples across the framework, the fiscal framework, in such a massive way. Other questions we've had is about what is the government doing on the price of groceries. You remember there was the Affordable Housing and Grocery Act, and the only thing they're really highlighting from the Affordable Housing and Grocery Act is the housing part, where they're lifting the GST on rental construction. But look, essentially what they're doing there is they're continuing with the competition measures, that they're targeting the behavior of the grocery stores, focusing on shrinkflation. There is the school food program that they say will help people by putting that in.
Comes down.
But broadly, that's what's happening, is that food inflation now is running below headline inflation. So it's still gone up by about 20% over the last while, but the rate of it is slowing down, decelerating, and a lot of that is because of the political situation.
That's two questions. I'm sure you have a lot more, so you can feel free to send them anyway. I'll probably use them for our show on Sunday. A final thought from you on whether this budget does what they want it to do.
Well, you know, to pick up on all the different groups that Adish was talking about, who this government's trying to appeal to, they are underwater with male voters, right? People who look like me do not vote Liberal and will not vote Liberal. That's a sunk cost. There is a gender and generational play here for them. There are a lot of issues that are putting on the table, important to suburban moms in particular, female voters, progressive voters, and younger voters. They have 18 months for these measures to gain traction in sort of solving the issues that people want to address and then connecting with the people they're trying to help. So it's a tall order. We've seen an aggressive rollout plan for the weeks leading up to this budget, which they were praised for being strategic and proactive in their communications. What do they do tomorrow? What do they do the day after? What do they do the day after that? How do they get the workers to build these homes? And how do they get the municipalities and the provinces to agree to the conditions they put on all the funding? If those things don't work, this will not work for them.
David, thank you so much for that. As David points out, one of the biggest challenges certainly for the government right now is that it is running against a clock, the electoral clock, and it has to start showing that some of the things it has announced today will start to benefit Canadians. And again, we do want to hear from you about whether there's anything in there that will. We have ongoing coverage, of course, here on cbcnews.ca, and David will be back in mere moments on Power and Politics. He'll have an interview with the Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, right off the top of his show. We hope we gave you the information you needed this hour. More still to come. I'm Rosemary Barton. Thanks on behalf of myself and the whole team for our special coverage of Budget 2024. Have a good day.
Tonight, breaking news from here in Tel Aviv, the war cabinet meeting again in Israel tonight, and now Israel says it will respond after Iran's first ever direct attack on Israel. And in the U.S. tonight, the first ever criminal trial involving a former president begins. And what's happened already in Donald Trump's trial. Trump arriving for his criminal trial in New York, charged with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records to cover up an alleged hush money payment to Stormy Daniels to hide their alleged affair from voters before the election. Tonight, potential jurors in that courtroom and what they were asked right in front of Donald Trump. Here in Israel tonight, that war cabinet meeting, Israel now saying there will be a response after the aerial assault from Iran. More than 300 missiles and drones in the middle of the night sent from Iran. For the first time, a direct attack by Iran on Israel. Matt Gutman here in Israel tonight, what the Israeli military is now signaling what could be coming and when. Mary Bruce at the White House, what President Biden has warned about any retaliation against Iran, that the U.S. will not be a part of it. And Martha Raddatz on the scope of this Iranian attack and what the U.S. did to help defend Israel. Back in the U.S. tonight, in Syracuse, New York, a police officer and deputy killed. The suspect refusing to pull over during an attempted traffic stop. Authorities then tracking a suspect to the home. The armorer in the Rust movie shooting, her job was to make sure the weapons used on set were secure. Tonight, she's now been sentenced. What the judge said. Tonight, the grim discovery of the search for two missing moms. They were going to pick up one of the mother's children from a birthday party. What's now been discovered. The images in the U.S. causing outrage tonight. The two vandals seen destroying an ancient rock formation, tens of millions of years in the making. And Boston strong tonight. The remarkable images coming in from the Boston Marathon.
From ABC News, this is ABC World News Tonight with David Muir. Reporting tonight from Tel Aviv, Israel.
Good evening tonight from Tel Aviv. We are here tonight as the world now waits for Israel's response after the first ever direct attack by Iran on Israel. More than 300 missiles and drones in the middle of the night. The U.S. helping to defend Israel from that Iranian attack. Tonight, the Israeli war cabinet meeting again. And now Israel saying there will be a response. And of course, the history also made tonight back in the U.S. The other major story, for the first time ever, a criminal trial involving a former president. Donald Trump arriving at court facing 34 felony counts of falsifying business records to cover up an alleged hush money payment to Stormy Daniels to hide their alleged affair from voters before the 2016 election. Trump in the courtroom today as the first 96 potential jurors filed in, the judge asking them if they could be fair and impartial. And with Donald Trump right there watching, more than half of them raising their hands to say they could not be impartial. They were led from the room, and the jurors who did remain, they were asked pages of questions in front of Trump. Jury selection could take weeks. Senior investigative correspondent Eric Kursky leading us off tonight at the courthouse.
Tonight, Donald Trump walking into the courtroom on the 15th floor of New York State Supreme Court in Lower Manhattan, the first president in U.S. history to stand trial as a criminal defendant.
Nothing like this has ever happened before. There's never been anything like it. This is an outrage that this case was brought.
Trump faces 34 felony counts of falsifying business records to cover up a hush payment to porn star Stormy Daniels to keep her allegations of an affair secret from voters during the 2016